The red sky above Zephyr Prime burned like fire. Commander Hyan sat in the broken remains of what used to be the most beautiful city in 12-star systems. His blue skin was covered in dust, and his eyes were empty of hope. Around him, the crystal towers that once reached toward the clouds lay in pieces. The proud Zephyrian people, who had ruled the stars for 1,000 years, now crawled through the rubble like lost children. Their energy shields that had protected whole planets were gone. Their mighty fleets floated dead in space. The Devourers had come from the edge of the galaxy 6 months ago. No one knew where these metal creatures came from or what they wanted. They looked like giant silver spiders made of moving parts and glowing lights. Everything they touched turned into more of them. Planets, ships, even people, all became part of their growing army. Hyan remembered when the first reports came in. The outer colonies had gone silent. Then the mining worlds. Then the military bases. Each time, the survivors told the same impossible story. The machines ate everything and made copies of themselves. They moved like water, but struck like lightning. No weapon could stop them for long. The Zephyrian Council had been sure their advanced technology would save them. They had energy weapons that could crack moons. They had shields that could stop anything. They had computers that could think faster than any living mind. But none of it mattered. The Devourers learned from every attack and grew stronger. Now, Hyan knelt in the ruins of his home world, watching his people dig through broken buildings looking for food and water. Children who had never known hunger now cried from empty stomachs. Adults who had lived in floating palaces now slept on cold stone floors. "Commander," called out his communications officer, Yun. Her voice was weak and tired. "Should I send the message again?" Hyan nodded slowly. They had been sending the same plea for help across all radio channels for 3 days. Every species in the galaxy must have heard it by now. But no one had answered. The other great powers were too busy protecting their own worlds, or had already fallen to the metal plague. "This is Commander Hyan of the Zephyrian Confederation." Yan spoke into her headset. "Our worlds are dying. Our fleets are destroyed. The machines have taken everything. We, who once thought ourselves the masters of space, now beg for help. If anyone can hear this message, please. We were wrong to look down on other species. We were wrong to think we were better. Help us. Our people are dying." The message went out into the empty darkness of space. Hyan did not expect an answer. The Galactic Council had already declared the Zephyrian systems a lost cause. The mighty Karathi Empire had retreated behind their fortress worlds. Even the wise ethereal collective had gone silent. But then, something impossible happened. A response came from a small blue planet on the far edge of the galaxy. A world that most civilized species barely knew existed. Earth, the humans. "We hear you," came the simple message. "We are coming." Hyan stared at his communications officer. Ian looked back with confusion in her large eyes. "Did they say they are coming?" Hyan asked. "Yes, Commander." The transmission came from the Sol system, from Earth. Hyan knew about Earth. Every educated being in the galaxy knew about this strange little world where the humans lived. They were new to space travel. Their ships were slow, and their weapons were simple. They used chemical rockets and metal bullets, while everyone else had moved to energy weapons thousands of years ago. Most species thought of them as cute, but harmless, like children playing with toys. Commander Yan said quietly, "What can they do? Their technology is so far behind ours. If our energy weapons could not stop the Devourers, how can their primitive guns help?" Hyan did not answer right away. He looked out at his broken city and his suffering people. In the distance, he could see the silver shapes of Devourer scouts moving between the ruins, always watching, always learning. "I do not know," he finally said. "But they answered when no one else would. They said they would come when everyone else has given up on us." Other messages started coming in as word spread across the galaxy. The Galactic Council sent a formal communication advising Earth to stay away. They explained that if the combined fleets of 12 major civilizations could not stop the Devourers, a primitive species like humanity had no chance. They suggested the humans focus on defending their own small corner of space instead, but the human response never changed. "We are coming." Hyen found himself thinking about the humans he had met in his long life. They were strange creatures, emotional where other species were logical, quick to anger but also quick to forgive. They formed bonds with other species that made no sense from a survival standpoint. They would risk their lives for strangers without any hope of reward. The other galactic powers had always found human behavior puzzling. Why would they care about beings they had never met? Why would they fight battles that were not theirs to fight? It seemed wasteful and inefficient. But now, kneeling in the ashes of his civilization, Hyen began to understand. The humans were coming not because they had better weapons or smarter strategies. They were coming because someone had asked for help, and that simple fact gave him the first real hope he had felt in months. Admiral Lee Soo-jin stood on the bridge of the UES Determination and watched the stars bend around her ship as they traveled faster than light toward the dying Zephyrian worlds. Her fleet was not impressive by galactic standards. 30 ships that had been built for different purposes, cargo haulers turned into weapon platforms, mining vessels with missile pods welded to their sides, and a few real warships that had never been tested in serious battle. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Park from his station. "We are getting another message from the Galactic Council." Lee sighed. This was the 5th message in 2 days, each one more urgent than the last. "Put it through," she said. The hologram of Ambassador Velenith appeared in the center of the bridge. The tall, thin alien looked worried, his forearms moving, in what Lee had learned was a sign of deep concern among his people. "Admiral Lee," Velenith said in his musical voice, "please reconsider this course of action. Our best strategists have studied the Devourer threat. If our most advanced weapons cannot stop them, your primitive technology certainly cannot." Lee felt her jaw tighten. She had heard the word primitive too many times in the past week. "We lost 3 battle fleets," Velenith continued. "Ships with energy shields that could stop small moons. Weapons that could burn through solid rock in seconds. Computer systems that could calculate 1,000,000 battle scenarios at once. All useless against these machines. Your chemical rockets and metal bullets are museum pieces. Please, focus on evacuating your own people instead." The message ended, and the bridge fell silent. Lee looked around at her crew. She saw doubt in some faces, but also determination. They had all volunteered for this mission, knowing the odds. "Sir," said Captain Kim quietly, "maybe they have a point. Our weapons are older technology. Our ships are slower. If their energy weapons failed." "Their energy weapons failed because they fought the way they always fight," Lee interrupted. "Long range, careful, calculated. These Devourers learn and adapt to whatever hits them, but they have never faced weapons like ours." She walked to the main display showing their fleet's formation. Each ship looked rough and simple compared to the smooth, elegant vessels of other galactic powers. But Lee saw something else in those, battered hulls' determination. "Send a message to Earth Command," she ordered. "Tell them we are proceeding as planned." Meanwhile, on the dying world of Zephyr Prime, Commander Hyen received updates about the approaching human fleet. The numbers did not look good. 37 ships against thousands of Devourers. Most of the human vessels were not even proper warships. "Commander," said his aide Yan, "I have been studying the human fleet composition. They have converted cargo ships into missile platforms. They are using nuclear weapons that most species stopped using centuries ago. Their largest ship is smaller than our old patrol boats." Hyen nodded, but felt something strange in his chest. Hope, not because the numbers looked good, but because the humans kept coming despite the numbers. "Have you listened to their radio chatter?" he asked. Yes, sir. It is very different from other military communications. They joke with each other. They talk about their families. One ship captain was teaching another how to make something called kimchi. They do not sound afraid, Hyen observed. No, sir. They sound almost ... excited. Back on the Determination, Admiral Lee gathered her ship captains for a final briefing before entering Zephyrian space. The holographic faces of 36 other commanders filled the conference room. Ladies and gentlemen, Lee began, I will not lie to you. We are about to face an enemy that has destroyed civilizations far more advanced than ours. They have weapons we cannot match, and numbers we cannot count. Several captains nodded grimly. But, Lee continued, they have never faced humans before. They have adapted to energy weapons by learning to absorb and redirect energy. They have beaten advanced AI by learning to outthink computers. But our weapons do not work like energy beams. Our tactics do not follow computer models. Captain Choi of the converted freighter Busan raised her hand. Admiral, what makes you think our approach will work? Lee smiled. Because we do not fight like them. When other species calculate acceptable losses, we see unacceptable surrender. When they retreat to regroup, we advance to engage. When they think logically, we fight with our hearts. The briefing continued for another hour. Lee explained their battle plan, which was simple to the point of being called insane by galactic standards. They would charge directly into the Devourer formations. No long-range engagements, no careful positioning, just straight-ahead attack, with everything they had. As the fleet prepared to drop out of hyperspace near Zephyr Prime, Lieutenant Park intercepted one more message from the Galactic Council. This time it was not advice. It was a warning to all species to stay away from human space after the inevitable defeat. They think we are going to die here, Park said quietly. Maybe we are, Lee replied. But someone called for help, and we answered. That is what humans do. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace just as the final Devourer assault on Zephyr Prime began. Thousands of silver machines filled the space around the planet like a metal storm. Lee looked at the overwhelming enemy force and felt her heart pound with excitement rather than fear. All ships, she announced, attack formation, take us right into their center. The human fleet, tiny and outgunned, charged directly toward certain death with engines blazing and weapons ready. The human fleet appeared in Zephyrian space, just as the final battle for Zephyr Prime was beginning. Commander Hyen watched from his command bunker, as thousands of Devourer ships surrounded his dying world, like metal vultures. The silver machines moved in perfect formation, their geometric shapes glowing with stolen energy from destroyed planets. Then the humans arrived. Admiral Lee's fleet dropped out of hyperspace and immediately did something that made every military expert in the galaxy stop and stare. Instead of taking defensive positions, or trying to establish long-range fire control, the 37 human ships turned directly toward the massive Devourer swarm and accelerated. What are they doing? Eon gasped, watching the tactical display. In disbelief, Hyen could not answer. No sane military commander would order a direct charge against such overwhelming odds. The Devourers outnumbered the humans 50-1. Their ships were larger, their weapons more powerful, their defenses nearly impenetrable. But the humans kept coming. All ships, attack pattern Omega. Admiral Lee's voice crackled across the communication channels. Take us right into their formation. No fancy moves, no careful positioning. We hit them hard, and we hit them fast. The first exchange of fire lit up space like a new star being born. The Devourers unleashed their energy weapons, beams of pure force that could slice through mountains. The humans responded with something the machines had never encountered before. Chunks of metal traveling at impossible speeds. Captain Kim's destroyer soul-fired its railgun at point-blank range into a Devourer command ship. The tungsten projectile accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, punched through the machine's adaptive energy shields like they were made of paper. The Devourer's defenses, designed to absorb and redirect energy attacks, simply had no way to deal with solid matter moving that fast. The enemy ship exploded in a shower of metal fragments. Direct hit, Kim shouted over the radio. Their shields cannot stop kinetic rounds. But even as the humans scored their first victories, the Devourers adapted. More ships moved to surround the human fleet. Return fire began to take its toll. The converted cargo ship Gwangju took a direct hit and broke apart. Her crew of 43 lost in an instant. Captain Park of the Gwangju had just enough time to send one final message: for Earth, for the people we have never met. Then something happened that changed everything. Lieutenant Zhang, flying a small fighter that had been designed for atmospheric patrol, saw a massive Devourer battleship moving to crush Admiral Li's flagship. Without hesitation, she turned her tiny craft directly toward the enemy vessel. "This is Lieutenant Zhang," her voice came over the radio, calm and clear. "I am sorry I cannot come home for dinner, Mother. Tell her I remembered to be brave." Zhang. Fighter slammed into the Devourer ship's control center at full speed. The explosion was small compared to the massive machine, but it hit exactly the right spot. The battleship's coordination systems failed, and it began firing randomly at its own forces. Commander Hyen stared at his screens in shock. She sacrificed herself deliberately. Why would she do that? Yan whispered. One small fighter against a battleship. The mathematics make no sense, but across the battlefield, other human pilots were making the same choice. When their weapons ran out, they used their ships as weapons. When their shields failed, they rammed enemy vessels. Captain Choi of the mining ship Inshin aimed her massive ore hauler directly at a cluster of Devourer fighters, taking out 12 enemy craft with her death. The Devourers, for the first time since their campaign began, seemed confused. Their collective intelligence could not understand this behavior. Every calculation showed that individual sacrifice for minimal tactical gain was inefficient and illogical, yet the humans kept doing it. Then Admiral Li played her final card. All ships with nuclear ordnance, she announced, close-range bombardment. Maximum yield. The Galactic Council had dismissed human nuclear weapons as primitive and obsolete. Energy weapons were cleaner, more precise, easier to control, but the humans had never stopped building bigger and better atomic bombs. The Determination and 6 other ships moved into the heart of the Devourer formation and released their entire nuclear arsenal at point-blank range. The explosions lit up half the solar system, but more importantly, they created massive electromagnetic pulses that disrupted the machine's network communications. Cut off from their collective intelligence, individual Devourer ships became confused and vulnerable. They had relied on instant communication and shared processing power for so long that they could barely function alone. Captain Song, commanding the escort frigate Daegu, saw the opportunity immediately. All remaining ships target the isolated units. They are vulnerable when separated. The tide of battle turned in minutes. Devourer ships that had seemed invincible began falling to concentrated human fire. The machines tried to re-establish their network connections, but the humans had learned their weakness and kept targeting communication nodes. Commander Hyen watched the impossible unfold before his eyes. The humans were not just fighting the Devourers, they were winning. These primitive people with their simple weapons and slow ships were doing what the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy could not do. How? Yan asked, tears streaming down her face. How are they doing this? Hyen thought about Lieutenant Zhang flying into certain death with a joke on her lips. About Captain Choi turning her cargo ship into a weapon. About Admiral Li charging into overwhelming odds without hesitation. They fight like gods, he whispered. Not because they are divine, but because they remember what the rest of us forgot. What is that, Commander? How to Die for Strangers. News of the human victory at Zephyr Prime spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Species that had written off entire star systems as lost to the Devourers suddenly found hope in the most unexpected place. The primitive humans from the edge of space were not just fighting the metal plague, they were pushing it back. Admiral Lee stood on the bridge of the Determination, now scarred and patched from a dozen battles, as her fleet approached the Helix Nebula. 3 Devourer strongholds had been built there, converting the beautiful gas clouds into massive factory ships that produced more of the killing machines. Her fleet had grown since Zephyr Prime. Survivors from dozens of species had joined the human advance, bringing their own ships and weapons. But the core remained stubbornly human in its approach to warfare. "Admiral," reported Commander O from the tactical station, "the Kethmer Squadron is requesting permission to retreat from Grid 7. They are facing odds of 3 to 1. Lee looked at the display showing the blue-skinned Kethmer fighters being overwhelmed by Devourer interceptors. The logical choice was to let them fall back and regroup. That was how galactic warfare worked. Careful retreats, planned advances, acceptable losses. "Denied," Lee said firmly. "Send the Busan and Incheon to reinforce them. No one retreats on my watch." Captain Nam of the Busan acknowledged the order without question, even though it meant diving into an impossible fight. Her converted cargo hauler, bristling with missile pods, charged toward the Devourer formation with engines blazing. Commander Haiyan, now fighting alongside the humans as part of the combined fleet, watched this exchange with growing amazement. The Zephyrians had spent centuries perfecting the art of strategic withdrawal. Their military doctrine emphasized preserving forces for better opportunities, but the humans seemed to have no concept of acceptable loss. Commander O, Admiral Lee continued, "Signal all ships. We are going to hit all 3 factory complexes at once." Admiral O said carefully, "That will spread our forces very thin. Standard doctrine suggests we concentrate on one target at a time." "Standard doctrine got half the galaxy eaten by machines," Lee replied. "We do this the human way." What followed was organized chaos that defied every military textbook in known space. The human fleet split into 3 groups and attacked all 3 Devourers' strongholds simultaneously. Each group was outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought with a flexibility that their enemies could not match. When conventional tactics failed, humans improvised. Captain Choi's engineering team jury-rigged Zephyrian energy weapons onto human hulls in the middle of a firefight. Lieutenant Song's squadron used damaged ships as decoys while functional vessels flanked the enemy from unexpected angles. The Devourers, programmed to adapt to established military patterns, found themselves constantly off balance. Every time, they developed a counter to human tactics. The humans changed their approach entirely. Commander Haiyan found himself using words he had never used in military reports. How else could he describe watching Captain Park's Marines board a Devourer ship and fight the machines hand-to-hand in the corridors? How could he explain Lieutenant Kim's fighter squadron holding off an entire enemy fleet while civilians evacuated from a dying station? "They do not fight like mortals," he reported to the reformed Zephyrian Council. "They fight like the answer to prayers we did not know how to speak." The key to human success was becoming clear to military analysts across the galaxy. It was not their weapons, though their kinetic arms proved devastatingly effective. It was not their ships, though their simple designs were surprisingly durable. It was their psychology. While other species had evolved beyond what they considered primitive emotional responses, humans retained something that advanced civilizations had optimized away: the willingness to die for strangers without calculation or hesitation. Captain Chen demonstrated this during the battle for Factory Complex Beta, when Devourer reinforcements threatened to overwhelm the evacuation ships. She ordered her destroyer into the enemy formation alone. "This is Captain Chen of the Mokpo." Her transmission crackled across all frequencies. "I am buying you time. use it well. Her ship lasted 8 minutes against impossible odds, but those 8 minutes allowed 3,000 civilians to escape. When the mockbow finally exploded, taking 12 devourer ships with it, the entire combined fleet observed a moment of silence. "Why do they do this?" asked Feltar, a Zephyrian tactical officer, serving on a human ship. "Because someone needs help," replied Ensign Min, barely out of training, but already a veteran of 6 battles. "That is what humans do." The tide of war turned not through superior technology or brilliant strategy, but through the simple human refusal to accept defeat. When faced with impossible odds, other species calculated survival probabilities. Humans just got angry. 6 months after the first battle at Zephyr Prime, Colonel Kim led the final assault on the last Devourer stronghold. Her volunteer regiment, made up of humans and aliens fighting side by side, stormed the machine fortress with nothing but personal weapons and unshakable determination. When the last Devourer fell, the galaxy fell silent. The plague that had consumed worlds and destroyed civilizations was finally dead. And it had been stopped, not by the greatest military minds or the most advanced technology, but by a species that most had dismissed as primitive. In the aftermath, as rescue ships searched for survivors and the rebuilding began, one question echoed across every world: how had the humans done the impossible? The answer was simpler than anyone wanted to admit. They had remembered what it meant to care about strangers. The ceremony on New Zephyr was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Representatives from 47 different species gathered in the rebuilt Crystal Amphitheater to witness something that had never happened before in recorded history. A species was being honored, not for conquest, but for salvation. Admiral Lee stood uncomfortably in the center of the Great Hall, surrounded by beings she had only read about in textbooks months earlier. The tall, graceful ethereals floated nearby, their translucent forms shimmering with inner light. The massive Korathi delegation stood like living mountains of stone and metal. Even the mysterious Shadow Collective had sent an envoy, though no one could see them clearly. "We gather today," announced Ambassador Velenith in his musical voice, "to recognize the species that saved us all when we had given up hope. The humans of Earth stepped forward when no one else would. They fought when fighting seemed impossible. They won when victory was beyond imagination." Lee shifted uncomfortably. She had tried to avoid this ceremony, but Earth Command had ordered her to attend. The politicians back home thought it was important for diplomatic relations. Lee just wanted to go home to her small apartment in Seoul and forget about the war. "Admiral Lee," Velenith continued, "your species has asked for nothing in return for their sacrifice. No territory, no tribute, no special privileges. You seek only the right to exist peacefully among the stars. This humble request makes your actions even more remarkable." Commander Hyen stepped forward from the Zephyrian delegation. His blue skin had regained its healthy color, and his eyes were bright with hope again. "Admiral, before your people came, we thought we were the masters of space. We looked down on species we considered primitive. We were wrong about everything that mattered." He gestured to the great display screen that showed the current state of the galaxy. Green lights marked systems that were safe and rebuilding. Just 6 months earlier, most of those lights had been red, consumed by the Devourer plague. "You saved us not because you had better weapons," Hyen continued, "but because you had something we had lost. The willingness to risk everything for strangers." Lee finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "We did not come to save you because we are better than anyone else. We came because someone called for help, and we were close enough to answer. That is all." But the assembled delegates understood what had really happened. Captain Kim, who had served as Lee's tactical officer throughout the war, had spent months analyzing the human campaign for the military archives. The humans had succeeded where advanced civilizations failed, not through superior technology, but through something far more profound. While other species had evolved beyond what they considered primitive emotional responses, humans had retained the capacity for unconditional sacrifice. Their outdated nuclear weapons had not been a sign of technological backwardness, but evidence of a species that never stopped preparing for the unthinkable. Their simple kinetic guns worked precisely because they were simple. Too basic for the devourers, adaptive systems to counter effectively. Most importantly, their willingness to die for strangers had created a psychological weapon that the machines could never understand or adapt to. Every time a human pilot rammed their ship into an enemy vessel, every time a captain stayed behind to buy evacuation time, every time a soldier charged impossible odds, they demonstrated something that had been optimized out of galactic civilization. As the ceremony continued, stories were shared from across the former war zone. Lieutenant Park, who had given his life defending a Kethmer colony ship, Captain Song, who had held off 3 Devourer battleships single-handedly while civilians evacuated, Colonel Min, who had walked into a machine stronghold with nothing but a backpack full of explosives and a smile. "They fought like gods of war," whispered a young Zephyrian in the audience to her companion, "but they acted like gentle gardeners when the fighting was done." This was perhaps the most remarkable thing about the human intervention. After every battle, when the shooting stopped, human ships were the first to offer medical aid to wounded enemies. Human engineers helped rebuild destroyed stations. Human doctors treated anyone who needed help, regardless of species. The Karathi ambassador, a being of living stone who rarely spoke, rose slowly to address the gathering. In our ancient texts, we speak of mythical warriors who would appear. In our darkest hour, we called them the blessed strangers, those who would fight not for glory or gain, but simply because fighting was needed. He turned his massive form toward Admiral Lee. "We thought these were only stories. We were wrong." As the formal ceremony ended and the delegates began to disperse, the galaxy's power structure had quietly but permanently shifted, not through conquest or intimidation, but through the simple recognition that when the universe went dark and hope died, there was one species that would charge into the darkness anyway. In the years that followed, when young beings across the galaxy learned about the Great Devourer War, they always asked the same question: why did the humans come? What did they gain? The answer was always the same: they came because someone needed help. That is what humans do. Admiral Lee returned to Earth a month later. She retired quietly to her small apartment in Seoul, where she grew vegetables in window boxes and taught neighborhood children how to play chess. She never spoke publicly about the war again, but sometimes, on clear nights, she would look up at the stars and smile, knowing that somewhere out there, people she had never met were living free because someone had answered when they called for help. That, she knew, was enough.